Leila McCulloch was last seen by her estranged husband, Matthew Ryan McCulloch, at their home in the 21,000 block of Evergreen Mills Road in Leesburg, Virginia, on August 14, 2012. She was a belly dancer at the time of her disappearance and had a 4-year-old child. After she was last seen, Leila's cellular phone pinged off a tower several hours south of her home. But there was no further activity on her phone, debit, or credit card since that day. She was reported missing on August 30, 2012. Just months before her disappearance, in April 2012, Leila had been charged with domestic assault against Matthew after a dispute over alleged infidelity. She pleaded guilty and was placed on probation, ordered to attend counseling, but she disappeared shortly after, failing to follow up with the court system. After her vanishing, police conducted a search of Matthew's apartment in Herndon, Virginia, where they seized several firearms and a significant amount of ammunition. In May 2013, Matthew was arrested and charged with unlawful possession of a machine gun after he hid a .45 caliber Thompson submachine gun in his girlfriend's car and told her it was because it wasn't registered. He later attempted to have a friend hold onto the gun, but the friend turned it into the sheriff's office. Foul play is suspected in Leila's disappearance. She had been seen with bruises on her arms before she went missing and had confided in others that Matthew had assaulted her and even threatened to have her deported to her native Russia. Despite the ongoing investigation, her case remains unsolved. The Loudoun County Sheriff's Office is continuing to investigate the case, and anyone with information is encouraged to come forward. Alexander Smith was reported missing by his brother from Virginia Beach, Virginia, on December 17, 2000. According to Alexander's wife, Michelle Renee Smith, he had driven away in her van, a white 1982 Ford with Virginia license plate number YME 2039, on October 15th and never returned. Michelle said she assumed he had simply left her. For years, there were no solid leads regarding Alexander's whereabouts, and his case seemed to stall. In 2005, however, new developments in the case came to light when Michelle was charged with Alexander's murder. The charges stemmed from an anonymous tip that told police Michelle had shot her husband while he was sitting on a couch at their townhouse in the 3500 block of Windmill Drive. After killing him, she allegedly disposed of his body by hauling it away in the same van that Michelle had claimed Alexander was driving when he left. The tip led investigators to the couch and the van, and when they found them, they discovered that the couch had a bullet hole in it, further corroborating the story told by the informant. A second source came forward, confirming the details of the shooting. Alexander and Michelle's relationship had been turbulent for many years. They had been dating since their teenage years, and Michelle gave birth to their first child in 1989 while still in high school. They married in 1993, and shortly after, Michelle had a second daughter. Over the years, the couple moved several times, and their marriage was marked by a history of violent arguments. Michelle had previously brought assault charges against Alexander, but had always withdrawn them. In 1993, Michelle had been charged with shooting Alexander, though she claimed self-defense and the charge was dismissed. Just before his disappearance, Alexander had been attempting to bring an assault warrant against her, adding another layer of suspicion to the case. Despite the emerging evidence, the case against Michelle ultimately fell apart. A grand jury found that there was insufficient evidence to indict her, and the charges were dropped. She was set free, and Alexander's body was never found. His disappearance remains unresolved. Shirley Russell was last seen at her married officer's quarters on the military base in Quantico, Virginia, on March 4, 1989. At the time of her disappearance, she had separated from her husband, Robert Peter Russell, approximately 6 weeks earlier. Their marriage had been described as unhappy, with allegations of Robert's abuse, alcoholism, and infidelity. Shirley had sought marriage counseling at least 8 times during their 18-month marriage. The day before she disappeared, Shirley picked up the final version of their marital settlement agreement and made a down payment on a condominium where she planned to live. At the time, Shirley was a captain in the United States Marines and was seen as a promising candidate for promotion to the rank of major. Robert, on the other hand, had been dishonorably discharged shortly before her disappearance, and by March 4th, he had moved off the base, leaving Shirley in the bachelor quarters. On the day she went missing, Robert and Shirley were cleaning out their previous quarters. According to Robert, he last saw Shirley when she left to walk 5 miles to a store to buy a tin of paint. The temperature was around 40 degrees when she left, and she was never seen again. Robert was charged with her murder after her disappearance. Prosecutors argued that he shot Shirley to death with a .25 caliber pistol while they were in a storage shed next to their quarters, dismembered her body, and disposed of her remains in a mine shaft in rural Pennsylvania. Robert maintained his innocence during his 1991 trial, but the case against him was entirely circumstantial. There were no witnesses, no blood was found in the shed, and the supposed murder weapon, which Robert had purchased just days before Shirley's disappearance, was never found. One key piece of evidence presented at trial was a 26-step recipe for murder that Robert had written prior to Shirley's disappearance. His mother testified that the list was part of a manuscript for a novel he had thrown away. Another prosecution witness testified that she had an affair with Robert several months before Shirley went missing, and that Robert had confided in her that he wanted to murder his wife. Robert, however, argued that Shirley was still alive and had left of her own accord because she was tired of military life. Despite the lack of direct evidence, he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His case became notable as the first federal murder trial in which the victim's body had not been recovered. Shirley's passport and driver's license were missing along with her, and to this day, they have not been found. She has not used her credit cards or bank accounts since her disappearance, and all of her property that had been placed in storage remained untouched. Given the circumstances, foul play is suspected in her case. In 1997, 8 years after her disappearance, a made-for-television movie titled The Perfect Murder was aired, based on Shirley's case. The Naval Criminal Investigative Service continues to investigate the case, which remains unsolved. Eric McFadden was reported missing on June 26, 2019, over 6.5 years after he disappeared from Charlottesville, Virginia, on November 23, 2014. His disappearance may be connected to the case of Dashad Sage Smith, a transgender woman whom McFadden knew. Smith disappeared from Charlottesville on November 20, 2014. She and McFadden had been exchanging texts and calls for weeks before her disappearance. They had met in person before, and Smith had accepted money in exchange for the promise to keep her relationship with McFadden a secret from his girlfriend. On the day of her disappearance, Smith was supposed to meet McFadden near the Charlottesville Amtrak station, but she was never heard from again, and her disappearance is being investigated as a homicide. 3 days later, on November 23rd, McFadden, who lived in Charlottesville and worked at a paint store, suddenly left town. His girlfriend reported him missing on November 24th, 2014. McFadden called the police on November 27th, telling them he was in New York. During the call, he claimed that Smith never showed up for their planned meeting, and he didn't know what had happened to her. The police advised him to return to Virginia, but McFadden hung up on them. On November 29th, McFadden's girlfriend told the police that he was planning to take a bus back to Charlottesville and expected the police to pick him up. However, the following day, she said that McFadden had changed his mind. He sent her an email stating that Smith had been blackmailing him, threatening to reveal their sexual encounter to his girlfriend. McFadden claimed that he did meet with Smith on the day of her disappearance, but insisted that he didn't know what had happened to her. He also mentioned that Smith had a lot of enemies. The last known communication from McFadden came in May 2013, when he sent an email to his girlfriend from an untraceable email address. After that, McFadden was never seen or heard from again. In June 2019, investigators interviewed McFadden's mother, who revealed that she had assumed his father had filed a missing persons report. When she learned this had not been done, she filed the report herself on June 26, 2019. Both McFadden's mother and stepmother believe that he may be deceased. McFadden attended Lincoln University in Oxford, Pennsylvania, from 2009 to 2011. He may have traveled to several locations, including Baltimore, Maryland, Joppa, Maryland; Lake City, South Carolina; Columbia, South Carolina; Atlanta, Georgia; Rochester, New York City, or possibly somewhere on the West Coast. McFadden is considered a critical person of interest in the disappearance and presumed homicide of Doshead Smith. Both cases remain unsolved. Bonnie Santiago was last seen at her boyfriend's residence on Carter Mountain in Albemarle County, Virginia, at 1 a.m. on July 12, 2014. She has never been heard from again. Her boyfriend, who was the last person to see her, was ruled out as a suspect in the early stages of the investigation. A few days after her disappearance, her van was discovered, and it showed evidence of a violent struggle. The rearview mirror of the vehicle had been nearly torn off, and there was blood, believed to be Bonnie's, at the scene. Additionally, there were footprints on the inside of the windshield, suggesting that something occurred inside the vehicle that led to a confrontation. Inside the van, investigators found Bonnie's personal belongings, including her cellular phone, eyeglasses, flip-flops, and medication, all of which were left behind. At the time of her disappearance, Bonnie was living in Brands Flat, Virginia. She left behind 7 children and 14 grandchildren. Her niece, Sabrina High, also known as Sabrina Rock, was a cast member on the reality television show Breaking Amish for the first 3 seasons, bringing additional attention to the case. Since Bonnie's disappearance, there has been no indication that she has accessed her bank accounts, nor has she refilled her prescriptions, which suggests that she did not leave voluntarily. Investigators strongly believe that she met with foul play and is likely deceased. In 2016, law enforcement took the unusual step of draining a septic tank and searching it for her remains, but their efforts turned up nothing. Bonnie's case remains unsolved. Doshead Sage Smith was last seen walking in the 500 block of West Main Street in Charlottesville, Virginia, at 6:30 p.m. on November 20, 2012. She had been in contact with Eric McFadden, a man she had met online, and they had made plans to meet near the Amtrak station. The two had been exchanging calls and texts for weeks and had met in person before. During their interactions, Smith accepted money from McFadden in exchange for her promise to keep their relationship a secret from McFadden's girlfriend. Smith has not been heard from since that evening. 2 days later, Smith's family reported her missing after she failed to show up for Thanksgiving dinner, a significant family event. Since her disappearance, her cell phone has been turned off, which was unusual for her, as she always kept it charged and on. This raised further concern for her safety. McFadden, who was the last person known to have interacted with Smith, left town shortly after her disappearance. His girlfriend reported him missing on November 24th. However, McFadden contacted police on November 27th and claimed he was in New York. He said that Smith never showed up for their planned meeting and that he didn't know what had happened to her. When the police instructed him to return to Virginia to speak with them, McFadden hung up on them. Later, on November 29th, McFadden's girlfriend informed the police that McFadden had been planning to return to Charlottesville, but had changed his mind. In an email to his girlfriend, McFadden claimed that Smith had been blackmailing him, threatening to tell his girlfriend about their sexual encounter. He also stated that while he had indeed met with Smith on the day of her disappearance, he had no idea what had happened to her and mentioned that Smith had a lot of enemies. Authorities still consider McFadden a person of interest in Smith's disappearance, though they have not been able to question him in person. The last known communication from McFadden was an email he sent to his girlfriend in May 2013 from an untraceable email address. McFadden's mother and stepmother have not heard from him since 2012 and believe he may be dead. In June 2019, McFadden's mother reported him missing to the Charlottesville Police Department. Smith was a 2011 graduate of Charlottesville High School and had taken cosmetology classes. She spent much of her childhood being raised by her grandmother before returning to her mother's care and later spending time in foster care. At the time of her disappearance, she had recently moved in with roommates in an apartment on Harris Street. In addition to McFadden, investigators have other individuals of interest in the case. One of Smith's roommates was caught using her food stamp card after she disappeared, raising suspicion. Another person, a friend of Smith's, was seen wearing a locket that belonged to Smith, although the woman claimed her boyfriend had given it to her. Smith's case has now been classified as a homicide investigation. Despite the various leads and persons of interest, her case remains unsolved. Authorities continue to search for answers regarding her disappearance. Grady Smith was last seen in Cedar Bluff, Virginia, on November 8, 2013. His wife reported that he left their home on foot during the early morning hours, intending to go hunting on their property on West Hurt Buggy Road. Smith was an experienced hunter and was very familiar with the area, which made his disappearance unusual. When Smith failed to return home by the evening, his family began searching for him and contacted the police. Despite an extensive search, no sign of his whereabouts was found. His phone and cigarettes were left behind at home, and his wallet was inside his truck. His rifle, which he would have taken with him on a hunting trip, was never found. At the time of his disappearance, Smith worked for Consol Coal Company as the general foreman at the Buchanan No. 1 mine, where he oversaw more than 500 people. He was known for being a conscientious and careful individual who made sure to follow all safety regulations and ensured his workers did the same. His disappearance was especially puzzling because he was respected for his work ethic and commitment to his job. In the weeks leading up to his disappearance, Smith had returned from a business trip to Atlanta, Georgia, in late October 2013. He was supposed to go back to work the day after arriving home, but remained on sick leave for 5 days, calling in for work and not checking in with the mine, which was unusual for him. On November 6th, Smith sent an email to his employer stating he was feeling better, planned to go hunting on Friday, and would return to work on Saturday. He then vanished. There were no signs that Smith was experiencing any personal or work-related problems at the time of his disappearance, and his loved ones do not believe he would have voluntarily left his family, career, and life behind. Speculation has arisen that he may have met with foul play, as a search of his property revealed no trace of him or any indication of an accident. As of now, Grady Smith's case remains unsolved, and his disappearance continues to be a mystery. Authorities have not been able to determine his whereabouts or the circumstances surrounding his disappearance. If you have any information in this case, please contact the Tazewell County Sheriff's Office at 276-988-0645. Carolyn Smith was last seen at her home on Richards Boulevard in Roanoke, Virginia, on June 6, 1994. Neighbors reported seeing her watering flowers in her yard at 7:15 a.m., which was the last time anyone outside of her family saw her. Carol's husband, David L. Smith, was away on a business trip between May 25th and May 27, 1994. When he returned, he discovered an unknown pair of men's boxer shorts in their bedroom, which led him to believe Carol had been unfaithful during his absence. On June 5th, David confronted Carol about his suspicions, but she refused to discuss the matter. The following morning, on June 6th, after their 2 children left for school, David confronted Carol again at around 8 o'clock a.m. According to David, Carol made a brief phone call, and just 2 minutes later, a green full-sized American-made car with a male driver arrived at the house. Carol's last words to her husband were, "You don't have to worry about me." She then took a small bag of clothing and several $100s in cash before leaving with the male driver in the green car. Carol has not been heard from since. David claimed he did not know the driver of the car and was unable to provide a description. It wasn't until 5 weeks later, when Carol's sisters were unable to contact her, that they were informed by David that Carol had left him. Her sisters then reported her missing. A month after her disappearance, David filed for divorce, stating in court documents that he did not report Carol missing because he assumed she would return on her own and that she wouldn't have wanted her parents to know she had left. Carol's family, however, did not believe she would have left willingly. Her sister stated that she had spoken with Carol by phone on May 28th, the day David returned from his trip, and that Carol had not mentioned any affair. Investigators also believe that Carol did not leave of her own accord, as she had strong family ties and was a devoted mother who would not have abandoned her children. Additionally, there has been no trace of Carol since her disappearance, and there has been no activity on her bank accounts. David gave permission for the police to search his home and truck. Authorities even dug up a recently poured concrete patio at the home, but found no evidence. In 1997, police conducted a search behind the Pulaski Correctional Unit, where David worked as the warden, but this search also turned up no evidence. Some reports list May 28, 1994, as the date of Carol's disappearance, but June 6 is the more widely recognized date. Carol's case remains unsolved, and authorities continue to investigate her disappearance, which is considered suspicious. If you have any information in this case, please contact the Roanoke County Police Department at 540-56-23265. Aaron Silverman was last seen leaving a party at a friend's residence in Norfolk, Virginia, on June 5, 1993. His brother, who attended the gathering as well, reported that Aaron spent most of the evening with a freelance go-go dancer from Newport News, Virginia. During the party, Aaron was wearing a necklace that the dancer had given him. According to his brother, Aaron told the woman that his family owned a boat and suggested she could join them on a future boat ride. At the time, Aaron and most of the other partygoers were intoxicated. Aaron eventually left with the dancer sometime during the night, and after that, he was never heard from again. At the time of his disappearance, Aaron had a troubled past. He did not graduate from high school and had a history of drug usage. His parents had separated, and he was facing both financial and personal problems. It wasn't uncommon for Aaron to disappear for a few days at a time, which is why his family did not immediately report him missing. They had become accustomed to his periodic absences. Aaron also did not take any of his personal belongings with him when he disappeared, nor did he inform anyone of any plans to leave. His family did not suspect anything unusual at first, assuming he would eventually return as he had done in the past. Authorities initially classified his case as that of a runaway, based on his history of leaving home for periods of time. However, Aaron's father took it upon himself to start searching for his son after filing a missing persons report. He visited bars in the Newport News area and learned from one establishment staff that a dancer there had a blonde boyfriend who might fit Aaron's description. The staff also mentioned that the woman lived in a trailer park and drove a red Pontiac Trans Am. Despite these leads, Aaron's father was unable to locate the dancer or her vehicle, and it remains unclear whether she had any involvement with Aaron's disappearance. Aaron enjoyed fishing and played guitar at the time of his disappearance, yet he did not have his guitar with him when he vanished, which raised further questions. His best friend did not believe that Aaron had serious relationship issues with his parents, even though they had occasional arguments. He found it hard to believe that Aaron would go for years without contacting his family. After Aaron's disappearance, his parents divorced, but despite this, the search for him continued. Aaron Silverman's case remains unsolved, and he is still classified as a runaway. Marie Godby was last seen on December 3, 1995, in Manassas, Virginia. She had 2 children with her ex, Walter Thomas Godby, an independent contractor. Though the couple never married, Marie often used Walter's last name. Earlier in 1995, Marie had been granted custody of their children, and Walter was ordered to pay child support. On the day she was last seen, Walter claimed that Marie had dropped their children off at his former residence on Orinoco Lane in Manassas, and then traveled to the Philippines to visit her mother, where some of her relatives lived. However, Marie's sister, Jewel Terry, revealed that she had an argument with her around the time Marie was last seen, and they had become estranged before Marie disappeared. Since then, Marie has never been heard from again. Walter's story about Marie traveling to the Philippines seemed highly unlikely to Jewel, as she knew that Marie didn't have a passport, and in any case, their mother had already passed away. Despite her suspicions, Jewel did not file a missing persons report immediately, as she and Marie were not on speaking terms at the time. Walter's criminal history later brought more attention to Marie's case. In December 2001, he was charged with the murder of Douglas Alexander Small, an America Online marketing director. Walter confessed to killing Small after an argument about Walter's renovation work for Small's Washington, D.C. home. He shot Small, moved the body to Alexandria, Virginia, and dumped the remains, which were later discovered. Walter was convicted and sentenced to 30 years in prison for that crime. It wasn't until Walter's arrest for the murder of Small that Terry finally filed a missing persons report for Marie. She told investigators that she had refrained from contacting law enforcement sooner because of the estrangement between her and her sister. Terry also expressed her suspicions that Walter was involved in Marie's disappearance. She knew that his claim that Marie had gone to the Philippines couldn't possibly be true, given that Marie didn't have a passport and her mother was deceased. During questioning, Walter's wife, Carla Godby, told police that Walter had confessed to Marie's murder. She claimed that Walter had shown her Marie's body while holding a gun to her head. According to Carla, Marie's body had been dismembered, with the torso buried in a wooded park in Fairfax, Virginia. However, when authorities searched the location Carla had mentioned, they found no evidence to support this claim. After speaking with Carla, investigators went to question Walter in prison. He claimed that Marie and Carla had gotten into an argument, and during the altercation, a gun had went off, killing Marie accidentally. In November 2009, Walter was indicted for murder, robbery, and unlawful use of a firearm in connection with Marie's presumed death. He pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter in June 2010 and was sentenced to 10 years in prison, to run on top of the 30 years he was already serving for the murder of Douglas Small. Marie's sister, Terry, stated that Walter had been physically abusive to Marie and believed that the sentence was too lenient. But investigators said they could not find enough evidence to prove premeditated murder. Foul play is strongly suspected in Marie's disappearance due to the circumstances, and while Walter is incarcerated for other crimes, Marie's case remains unresolved. Israel Ray Smith was last seen on March 10, 2008, in his hometown of Wytheville, Virginia. He had just completed his shift at Radio Shack at 8 p.m. and then went to visit his brother. He also spoke to his mother on the phone that day. According to his supervisor, Israel was behaving normally at work, and before leaving, he casually said, "I'll see you tomorrow." He didn't show up for his shift the next day, nor did he call in. Israel has never been heard from again. Israel maintained regular communication with his mother, calling her at least a couple of times each week. When she visited his apartment on March 11th and 12th, she was concerned when Israel didn't answer the door, even though his car was parked outside. She left notes asking him to call her. By March 13th, Israel's family was becoming increasingly concerned, especially when he didn't contact them for his brother's birthday. His mother, brother, and the brother's girlfriend visited his apartment in the late evening. They knocked on his door repeatedly, but Israel still didn't answer. A neighbor mentioned they hadn't seen him recently. The following day, on March 14th, Israel's mother returned to his apartment and noticed his vehicle, a green 1992 Ford Explorer with Virginia license plate, KHA 2683, had not been moved from its spot. She tried the car doors, and they were unlocked. Inside the vehicle, she found a basket of clean laundry. She then tried the apartment door, which was also unlocked. Despite the door being open, Israel wasn't there. At this point, Israel's mother called the police, and they informed her they had already conducted a welfare check at the apartment earlier that day. At the time, the apartment door had been slightly ajar, and the officers noticed that Israel's car doors were unlocked with the keys inside. Inside the apartment, the lights and television were turned on, the video game controller was plugged in and lying on the floor, and Israel's keys were found on the coffee table. There were no signs of a struggle, no forced entry, and nothing appeared to be missing from the apartment. Additionally, there were no indications that Israel had planned to leave for any extended period. Israel had worked at Radio Shack since September 2007 and was considered an ideal employee. He never missed work and was never late without notifying someone. Leaving the apartment door unlocked and his video game controller lying out were unusual behaviors for him, as he was typically meticulous about keeping his belongings organized. Israel also left behind his 7-year-old son, who lived with his mother. Although Israel and the mother were no longer together, he was very involved in his son's life and visited him most weekends. Since his disappearance, Israel's cellular phone hasn't been used, and all calls go to voicemail. Additionally, there has been no activity on his bank account or his MySpace account. Authorities interviewed a woman who Israel had recently dated. It had been reported that he was thinking of ending the relationship, but she has since been cleared as a suspect in the case. While authorities have stated that there is no hard evidence of foul play in Israel's disappearance, they do not believe he left voluntarily. His mother insists that he would never have left without warning, especially abandoning his son, and she fears that he may have come to harm. Israel's case remains unsolved. Lauren Suzanne Smith's disappearance on November 21, 2011, remains shrouded in mystery. According to reports, her cousin allegedly dropped her off at a residence on Oak Ridge Lane in Leon, Virginia, at 2:15 p.m. on that day. Smith was hired to clean the house for the homeowner, Kenneth Kubin. However, when Kubin returned home later that afternoon, he found the house unlocked, the dogs had been let out, but no cleaning had been done. Additionally, a revolver from the house was missing, though it has never been recovered. The last confirmed sighting of Smith was captured on surveillance video from a nearby 7-Eleven store at approximately 3 p.m., where she was seen visiting a friend. After this, there was no trace of her, and she has not been heard from again. Authorities have since questioned whether Smith's cousin actually dropped her off at the Oak Ridge Lane residence, casting doubt on that part of the story. The cousin has moved out of state, which has further complicated the investigation. Kenneth Kubin, the owner of the house Smith was supposed to clean, was later involved in a separate legal issue. In November 2013, he was sentenced to 5.5 years in federal prison for stalking his ex-girlfriend for 2 years. He had harassed her and posted 165 fake ads on Craigslist inviting strangers to her home for free sexual services. Despite his criminal behavior, there is no evidence linking Kubin to Smith's disappearance, and he has not been named a suspect in her case. At the time of her disappearance, Smith was carrying between $2,000 and $5,000 in cash, which she planned to use to purchase a car. She may have also had a set of unclaimed license plates, XBW 2666, which belonged to her brother. Smith left behind important personal items, such as her passport, credit cards, and driver's license. She did have her cellular phone with her, but she didn't have a charger, which could have made communication difficult. Smith was an avid gamer who played online video games with people from around the world, including players in Australia and the United Kingdom. Despite this, authorities could not find any connection between her gaming activity and her disappearance. She graduated from Madison County High School in 2007, earned an associate's degree from Jamana Community College, and was studying social work at Longwood University at the time of her disappearance. She was close to finishing her bachelor's degree. Though Smith had occasionally taken spontaneous trips in the past, she always kept in touch with loved ones. She frequently called and texted those close to her, but all communication stopped after her disappearance. Her family has not heard from her since. There are signs that Smith may have left on her own accord. A suitcase was missing from her home after her disappearance, and she had reportedly asked friends for advice on how to disappear. However, the lack of communication and the unusual circumstances surrounding her disappearance have led authorities to consider the possibility of foul play. Smith's case remains unsolved, with no clear answers yet to explain her whereabouts or the events leading up to her disappearance.